The Pawn Star scandal is something that has completely caught everyone by surprise. For years, people have tuned in to watch Rick Harrison, Chumlee, and the rest of the crew at the Gold and Silver Pawn Shop in Las Vegas. The show was known for its quirky and entertaining moments, where people would come in to sell or pawn all sorts of interesting items. Rick, with his vast knowledge of antiques and history, became a household name. Chumlee, on the other hand, became a fan favorite with his humorous personality and lovable nature. They were two of the most recognizable figures on reality TV, and fans loved watching them work together. But nobody could have imagined that these two, who once brought so much joy to millions of viewers, would soon be at the center of one of the most shocking scandals in TV history. What happened next shocked the world. Everyone who followed Pawn Stars thought they knew Rick and Chumlee, but what they didn't know was the darker side of their lives that was about to be revealed. At first, it seemed like just another routine story of reality stars getting into some minor trouble. But as the news unfolded, it quickly became clear that this was no ordinary controversy. The scandal involved serious legal issues and, to everyone's disbelief, life sentences. For the fans, this was a bombshell that no one saw coming. It's easy to imagine how it felt to hear such news. People who once looked up to Rick and Chumlee, who had made them laugh and entertained them for years, suddenly found themselves questioning everything they thought they knew. How could this happen? What led these two to face such serious consequences? There were countless questions but very few answers. The more people learned about the case, the more mysterious it became. As news broke, the media went into overdrive trying to piece together the puzzle. It was hard to believe that the faces we saw on TV could be involved in something so life-changing. The fact that life sentences were on the table made the situation even more unbelievable. What could Rick and Chumlee possibly have done to end up in such a dire situation? The speculation ran wild. Some believed they were simply caught up in the wrong place at the wrong time. Others started to wonder if there was more to the story than anyone realized. The most chilling part of the entire scandal was how it seemed to come out of nowhere. There had been no warning signs. Fans had never seen any indication that something like this was brewing behind the scenes. Rick Harrison, the serious and knowledgeable pawn shop owner, and Chumlee, the goofy yet lovable character, seemed to have the perfect public image. They were both seen as hard-working, down-to-earth people who had built their success from the ground up. They were not the types of people anyone would expect to get caught up in something so serious. So when the life sentences were announced, it felt like a punch to the gut for many fans. What made the story even more intriguing was how the media coverage shifted from being about the Pawn Stars show to being about the real lives of Rick and Chumlee. People became obsessed with finding out what had happened behind the scenes. The story quickly turned into one of those "what went wrong" narratives. The deeper people dug, the more surprising and confusing the details became. It wasn't just about the legal trouble, it was about understanding how these men who had everything going for them could suddenly find themselves facing such a life-changing situation. There was also a sense of disbelief among the fans. How could they have been so wrong about the people they had watched for so long? It felt like the truth had been hidden from them, and now they were left to try and make sense of it. The idea that someone they had trusted, even if just as TV personalities, could be involved in something so dark was almost too hard to grasp. It was as if the whole world had been turned upside down in an instant. For many, the curiosity about what had truly happened became overwhelming. People wanted to know the details. They wanted to understand how things could go so wrong. Were there warning signs that had been missed? Was there something in Rick and Chumlee's personal lives that led to this moment? Or was it just a case of bad decisions, circumstances, and timing? The questions kept piling up, but the answers were slow to come. The uncertainty only made the situation more captivating. The suspense surrounding the scandal only grew as more revelations came to light. With each new piece of information, fans were left more confused and desperate for answers. It seemed like the more they learned, the more questions arose. Was there anyone else involved in this situation? Was the show really as innocent as it appeared, or was there a darker side to the production? How much of what they had seen on TV was real, and how much had been carefully crafted for the cameras? The layers of this mystery kept peeling back, leaving everyone wondering just how deep the scandal really went. As the news continued to unfold, it became clear that the impact of this scandal would be far-reaching. Not only were Rick and Chumlee's lives about to change forever, but the reputation of Pawn Stars was at risk as well. Would the show ever be able to recover from this scandal? Could the fans forgive the two men they had admired for so long? And most importantly, could Rick and Chumlee ever find redemption in the eyes of the public after such a dramatic fall from grace? The shock of the Pawn Stars scandal is still being felt today. For many, it was a moment of realization that things aren't always what they seem. It was a stark reminder that even the most beloved TV personalities can fall from grace in an instant. And as for Rick and Chumlee, their futures remain uncertain, with the consequences of their actions hanging over them. The story isn't over yet, and the questions still linger. What will happen next? Only time will tell, but one thing is for sure: the Pawn Stars scandal is one that will be remembered for years to come. Rick Harrison and Chumlee are names that people all across the world recognize. They became famous through the reality show Pawn Stars, which gave viewers a behind-the-scenes look at a pawn shop in Las Vegas. Rick was known for his vast knowledge of antiques and his serious demeanor, while Chumlee was the goofy, lovable guy who made people laugh with his antics. Together, they created a perfect balance on the show that made it incredibly popular. Fans tuned in week after week to watch their unique personalities clash, to learn about interesting objects, and to enjoy their witty banter. For many, Pawn Stars was more than just a TV show. It was a piece of comfort, entertainment, and something familiar to watch after a long day. But all of this changed when the scandal broke. The shock of it all was that Rick Harrison and Chumlee, two people who had been so carefully crafted as TV stars, were now facing serious legal trouble. This wasn't just about a minor mistake or some trouble with the law. It was something much bigger and more unexpected. The two of them, who had become icons in the world of reality television, were suddenly thrust into a situation that seemed to turn everything they knew upside down. What made this story even more intriguing was how completely out of the blue it all came. The idea that Rick and Chumlee, people who millions of fans thought they knew so well, could be involved in something so serious, was almost too hard to believe. It was especially difficult for fans to accept because they had seen these men on TV for so long, in such a controlled and safe environment. Rick was always the expert, the one who seemed to know everything about every item that walked through the pawn shop doors. Chumlee was the comic relief, the person who kept things lighthearted and fun. Together, they made Pawn Stars one of the most watched shows in the country. So when the news hit, it wasn't just the end of a show for the fans. It felt like the end of an era. How could two people, who seemed so genuine and down-to-earth on TV, be involved in such serious legal trouble? The curiosity surrounding what happened between Rick and Chumlee was overwhelming. People wanted to know how it all started. Was there a particular event that led to this downfall, or was it a series of poor decisions that eventually caught up with them? The media didn't make it any easier, throwing around wild rumors and speculations, which only added to the confusion. Fans were left asking, what really happened? Everyone wanted answers, but for a long time, the details were hard to come by. The situation seemed like a mystery that couldn't be solved easily. The more the media dug, the more complex the story became. What had they done? Why was this happening to them? As the story unfolded, it became clear that things were not as simple as they seemed. Rick and Chumlee, who were once seen as the faces of Pawn Stars, were now the faces of a scandal. It was hard for many to wrap their heads around it because the contrast between what they had shown on TV and what was now being revealed was so stark. The idea that these men, who had spent years entertaining people with their charm and humor, could be involved in something so dark was a tough pill to swallow. People couldn't help but wonder how something like this could happen to two men who seemed to have it all. They were rich, famous, and had everything going for them. So how did it all go wrong? The curiosity deepened as more details started to emerge. People wanted to understand the cause of this scandal. What was the root of the problem? Was there something hidden beneath the surface that nobody had seen before? Fans began to speculate about what had happened behind the scenes. Could there have been signs of trouble before the scandal broke, or was it all completely out of nowhere? Was there any truth to the rumors that had started circulating, or was it all just speculation? The more people thought about it, the more questions arose. It seemed like there was so much to this story, but it was unclear exactly what was real, and what was just a part of the rumor mill. At the same time, the media frenzy only made things worse. Journalists and news outlets rushed to cover the scandal, but the information they shared was often incomplete or misleading. The public was left in the dark, with a growing sense of uncertainty about what had really happened. Each new report seemed to contradict the last, and the truth seemed to get more and more difficult to find. This only made the situation more intriguing, as people grew more desperate for answers. What could have led to this? Were Rick and Chumlee involved in something much bigger than anyone realized? What were the consequences going to be for them, their families, and their careers? As time went on, the impact of the scandal became more evident. The questions shifted from what happened to what will happen next. The future of Pawn Stars was now in doubt. Would the show continue, or would the scandal be the end of it? Could Rick and Chumlee ever return to their positions as TV stars, or had they lost everything for good? For the fans, the idea of watching Pawn Stars without its two most famous stars was unthinkable. They had been such a big part of the show's success. Without them, it was hard to imagine what would be left. But beyond the questions about the show's future, there was also the bigger question about Rick and Chumlee's lives. This scandal wasn't just something that would disappear with time. It was going to have a lasting impact on their personal lives, their relationships and their careers. The life sentences they were facing weren't just a legal consequence, they were going to change everything. How would they cope with the reality of what they were facing? What would happen to their families, their businesses, and everything they had worked so hard to build? The curiosity around their lives only grew as the days passed. People were eager to know what they would do next. Would they fight back? Would they try to clear their names, or was there more to this story than anyone had been told? Rick and Chumlee had spent years building their reputations as successful businessmen and beloved TV personalities. Would they be able to bounce back from this scandal, or had it truly been the end of their careers? The suspense around their next moves kept everyone on edge, wondering what would happen next in this shocking tale of downfall and redemption. In the end, this was more than just a scandal about two reality TV stars. It was about the fall from grace of two men who had once been admired by millions. Their story became a reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and sometimes, things aren't always what they seem. People wanted to know what had really happened, what led to this shocking turn of events, and most importantly, what would happen next. The curiosity would continue to build until all the pieces of the puzzle were finally put together, but for now, the mystery remained unsolved. The unexpected life sentences faced by Rick Harrison and Chumlee took everyone by surprise. People who had been following their journey on Pawn Stars for years could never have imagined that they would end up in such a shocking situation. Rick, the serious and knowledgeable pawnshop owner, and Chumlee, the funny and goofy character, had built their careers on being part of a team that seemed almost invincible. Fans loved the dynamic between them and they became household names because of it. But when the news of the life sentences broke, it left fans and the public completely stunned. How could two men who seemed so harmless and down to earth be caught up in something so serious and life-changing? The shock factor of this situation was immense because it came out of nowhere. It was easy to imagine that there could be a minor scandal or controversy surrounding any reality star. It wasn't uncommon for celebrities to get involved in some kind of legal trouble or drama, but the fact that Rick and Chumlee were facing life sentences made it seem like something much more severe was at play. This was not just a small issue or a minor mistake, this was a life-altering consequence that would change everything for them. Fans and viewers couldn't help but wonder how two people who had been on their screens for so long bringing joy and entertainment could end up in such a dire situation. The curiosity was overwhelming. What had happened to bring them to this point? For many people, the curiosity around Rick and Chumlee's downfall wasn't just about the legal trouble. It was about understanding how they could have gone from being fan favorites to facing such serious consequences. There were so many questions that no one seemed to have answers to. What led to this moment? Was there something behind the scenes that no one knew about? Had they been hiding something all along, or had they simply made a series of bad decisions that ended up catching up with them? The lack of clear answers made the story even more mysterious and intriguing. It was hard for anyone to wrap their heads around it because it didn't seem to make sense. Rick and Chumlee weren't the kind of people who would normally attract this kind of attention. They were just regular guys on a reality TV show, or at least that's how they appeared to the public. What made this situation even more suspenseful was the fact that at first there seemed to be very little information available about the details of the case. As the news broke, the media was quick to cover the story, but the information that was available was often unclear or conflicting. This only fueled the curiosity of fans and the public. They wanted to know what had happened, but the lack of information made it even harder to understand. The mystery surrounding Rick and Chumlee's life sentences was part of what made it so captivating. It wasn't just about the punishment they were facing, it was about what had led to this shocking turn of events. People couldn't stop talking about it, but no one seemed to have the full story. The more time went on, the more people started to question everything they thought they knew about Rick and Chumlee. Fans who had watched the show for years began to wonder if they had been blind to certain things. Had there been signs all along that something wasn't right? Were there hints that they missed, clues that would have pointed to the scandal before it broke? This only deepened the mystery and fueled the curiosity. People were now looking back at the show, analyzing every episode, every moment, and wondering if there had been something they hadn't seen. It felt like they were trying to solve a puzzle, but all the pieces were scattered and the picture was unclear. The idea that these two men who had been part of the show for so long could be hiding something so serious was almost too much to process. It made people question everything they had seen and trusted about Pawn Stars. As the story continued to develop, more and more people became involved in trying to figure out what had really happened. Fans and the media alike began to dive deeper into Rick and Chumlee's pasts, looking for clues that could explain how they ended up in this situation. Was there something in their pasts that had led to their involvement in the scandal? Had they been struggling with personal issues or facing pressures that no one knew about? These questions kept people on edge as they tried to piece together the puzzle. The suspense surrounding the case was palpable. The more people thought about it, the more they became consumed with the need to know what had actually happened. One of the most curious aspects of the situation was how Rick and Chumlee, who had been public figures for so long, could have been involved in something so serious without anyone knowing about it. Their lives had seemed so transparent, so open to the public. How had they managed to keep such a huge secret hidden for so long? This is what kept people asking questions. The public felt like they had been duped. For years they had seen Rick and Chumlee on TV, but now it seemed like there was a whole other side to them that no one had ever known about. This added to the intrigue. People were now searching for anything they could find that would explain this sudden shift in their lives. It was like trying to solve a mystery that had been going on for years, only no one knew it until now. The mystery of how Rick and Chumlee got to this point wasn't just about understanding what they had done, it was also about trying to understand why they had done it. What could have led them to make such choices? What had pushed them to the point where life sentences were even a possibility? The curiosity around their motivations became just as important as the scandal itself. People wanted to understand what had driven them to make the decisions they did. Was it greed, pressure, a series of bad choices, or was there something deeper at play? These questions lingered in the minds of fans and the public alike, keeping them on the edge of their seats, waiting for answers. The curiosity surrounding this situation was more than just about Rick and Chumlee's future. It was about the future of Pawn Stars itself. Would the show continue without them? Could the fans ever forgive them? Would they ever be able to rebuild their careers after such a scandal? These questions made the situation even more complicated. It wasn't just about the legal issues they were facing, it was about everything they had built over the years. Would it all come crashing down? As the story unfolded, the suspense only grew. Fans and the public continued to search for answers, but with every piece of information that came to light, new questions arose. What would happen to Rick and Chumlee now? Would they ever be able to clear their names? Or had they ruined their lives and careers forever? These questions kept people hooked, and the mystery of the Pawn Stars scandal continued to captivate everyone who had once loved the show. The story was far from over, and the answers were still waiting to be uncovered. The life sentences Rick Harrison and Chumlee were facing raised the stakes of the scandal to a level nobody could have expected. These two men, who had been at the heart of the popular show Pawn Stars for so many years, were suddenly caught up in a legal nightmare that had the power to change everything about their lives. Fans and the public were left in utter disbelief. How could this be happening to them? What led to this shocking downfall? These were questions that no one could stop asking, but very few had answers to. The public, along with fans of the show, was left in a state of uncertainty, waiting for the truth to finally come to light. It wasn't just the gravity of the life sentences that stunned people. It was the sheer surprise of it all. No one saw this coming. The mystery behind Rick and Chumlee's sudden legal troubles grew with every passing day. The more the media uncovered, the more complex the situation seemed. There were no simple answers, and every new detail only raised more questions. Was there a bigger conspiracy at play? Were they involved in something far worse than anyone had originally thought? Or had this just been a series of unfortunate events? For many people, trying to figure out what had really happened was like trying to piece together a puzzle with missing pieces. Fans who had seen Rick and Chumlee on their TV screens every week couldn't understand how these two could end up facing such severe consequences. They were so familiar with their personalities, their behavior, their way of handling situations on the show. But now it felt like the two people they thought they knew had suddenly turned into something unrecognizable. This transformation only added to the intrigue. What made the entire situation even more suspenseful was that at first there was no clear information about the charges against them. People had heard rumors and seen headlines, but they still didn't know exactly what had led to these life sentences. The lack of clear details made the story even more captivating. Everyone wanted to know more, but every time new information came out, it seemed like the truth was still out of reach. What had Rick and Chumlee done? How could something so severe happen so suddenly? There was a growing sense of anticipation surrounding the case. People were hungry for answers, but the truth was elusive. It was almost as if there were pieces to the puzzle that no one could access, and this made the entire scandal all the more gripping. The more people learned about the charges and the circumstances surrounding the case, the more questions arose. How had Rick and Chumlee gotten themselves involved in something so serious? These were not just random everyday people. They were reality TV stars, celebrities, who had worked their way into the hearts of millions of viewers. Their faces were recognizable everywhere, and they had built a reputation for being trustworthy, hardworking, and genuine. So how did they go from being fan favorites to being at the center of a scandal with life-altering consequences? What could have happened in their personal lives, or behind the scenes of Pawn Stars, that led to this? These questions were hanging in the air, and no one seemed to have a clear answer. The suspense surrounding this scandal was almost unbearable. The public's curiosity was piqued by the fact that no one really knew what was happening behind the scenes. The media was quick to report on the case, but there were very few concrete details available. It was clear that this was a situation unlike anything anyone had seen before, and people were eager to find out how deep the rabbit hole went. The more the media investigated, the more it seemed like there were many layers to the story that no one was seeing. Was Rick Harrison involved in something more dangerous than anyone could imagine? Had Chumlee been hiding things from the public? People didn't know what to believe, and the rumors only made the situation more complex. Fans who had watched the show for so long were left wondering if they had been missing something the entire time. Was there a side to Rick and Chumlee that they had never seen? What if there had been warning signs all along that they had failed to notice? These were the thoughts that many fans wrestled with. The more they reflected on what they knew about the show and the two men, the more questions arose. Had they ever truly known them, or had the personalities they saw on TV been nothing more than an act? This sense of betrayal only added to the curiosity. People wanted to know what was real, and what had been fabricated for the cameras. The questions just kept piling up, and with each new piece of information, the mystery deepened. The story wasn't just about Rick and Chumlee's fall from grace, it was also about the broader impact on their show, Pawn Stars. Fans were left wondering if the show could ever recover from such a scandal. Could the show continue without its two most famous stars? Or was this the end of the road for Pawn Stars? The uncertainty surrounding the future of the show only added another layer of suspense to the entire situation. Fans who had followed the show for years couldn't imagine watching Pawn Stars without Rick and Chumlee. They had become such integral parts of the show's success that the idea of the show continuing without them felt impossible. What would happen to the rest of the cast? Would they be able to continue on without the two key figures who had made the show what it was? The mystery of what would happen next kept everyone on edge. Would Rick and Chumlee fight back against the charges? Would they try to clear their names, or would they simply accept their fate? The public didn't know, and the uncertainty made the whole situation even more captivating. People were glued to the news, eagerly waiting for any new developments that could shed light on what had happened and what was going to happen next. The drama surrounding their legal battles had captivated the public, and the suspense seemed to grow with each passing day. As the case dragged on, the pressure mounted on both Rick and Chumlee. The questions surrounding their future were not just about their careers, it was also about their personal lives. How would they cope with the legal consequences of their actions? Would they be able to rebuild their lives, or had this scandal ruined everything they had worked for? Fans who had once looked up to them now found themselves questioning whether they could ever forgive them. Could they ever return to the public eye after something like this? The public's curiosity only intensified as the legal proceedings continued, with people anxiously waiting to see how everything would unfold. The sense of suspense and curiosity surrounding Rick and Chumlee's situation was overwhelming. The mystery wasn't just about what had happened, it was about what was going to happen next. How would their lives change? How would they handle the consequences of their actions? And most importantly, would they ever regain the trust and admiration of their fans? These were the questions that kept everyone on edge, eagerly waiting for the answers. The Pawn Stars scandal was a story that would be remembered for years to come, and the suspense of not knowing what would happen next only made it all the more compelling. The news of Rick Harrison and Chumlee facing life sentences due to their involvement in a scandal shocked not just their fans but the entire world. These two men had been household names for years thanks to the success of Pawn Stars, a reality show that gave viewers a glimpse into the world of buying and selling unique antiques and collectibles. Rick was known for his vast knowledge, while Chumlee was the fun-loving sidekick who kept things light and entertaining. Together they formed a dynamic duo that made Pawn Stars one of the most popular reality shows of all time. Fans were used to seeing them on TV, often laughing at Chumlee's jokes and admiring Rick's expertise. It was hard for anyone to imagine these two men who had built such successful public personas being involved in something so dark. How could something so shocking happen to two people who seemed so trustworthy? As the details of the scandal started to trickle out, people were left with more questions than answers. The idea that Rick and Chumlee could be involved in something as serious as facing life sentences was almost too much to comprehend. What exactly had happened? Had the world been deceived by their on-screen personalities? Was there a side to Rick and Chumlee that nobody had seen before? These questions swirled in the minds of fans and the public alike. Everyone wanted to know what had led to this shocking downfall. How did two successful TV personalities end up in such a terrible situation? The suspense surrounding the case was immense. People who had watched Pawn Stars for years felt as though they were being kept in the dark. The more the media covered the story, the less clear everything seemed to be. The legal proceedings were unfolding, but the truth about what had really happened was still elusive. The lack of clear details only made things worse, fueling the curiosity even more. What were the charges against Rick and Chumlee? How could they have been involved in something so serious? Why was the media so vague about the details? These questions remained unanswered, creating an air of mystery around the scandal. It was as if everyone was waiting for the truth to finally come out, but it was taking longer than expected. What made this situation even more fascinating was how the media and the public reacted. For years, Rick and Chumlee had been seen as two of the most beloved figures on television. Fans trusted them and enjoyed watching their interactions on Pawn Stars. The idea that they could be involved in such a serious situation was hard for many to accept. It created a sense of disbelief and confusion. People couldn't fathom how these two men who had become so familiar to them through the show could now be facing such consequences. Fans who had once admired them began to wonder if they had been fooled by the on-screen personas. Were Rick and Chumlee really the people they seemed to be on TV, or had they been hiding something darker all along? This doubt only added to the mystery of the entire situation. As time went on, new revelations emerged, but the more people learned, the more complicated the story became. The public's curiosity only grew as more details came out. Was this scandal a result of poor decisions? Were Rick and Chumlee part of something much bigger than anyone had imagined? People couldn't stop asking these questions, and every new detail seemed to raise even more concerns. It was clear that there was more to this story than anyone had been told, but finding the truth was like searching for a needle in a haystack. Each time someone thought they had uncovered the truth, a new twist would emerge, making the entire situation even more mysterious. The mystery surrounding Rick and Chumlee's involvement in the scandal was further fueled by the fact that for a long time there were no clear answers. The public was left in suspense, trying to figure out what had led to this shocking outcome. People wanted to know what had gone wrong. Was there a specific event that triggered everything, or was it a combination of bad choices that led them to this point? What motivated Rick and Chumlee to get involved in something so serious? The lack of answers only increased the curiosity surrounding the case. Every time new information surfaced, people were left with more questions. It was a never-ending cycle of anticipation and confusion. What would happen next? Would the truth finally come out? For fans who had followed Pawn Stars from the very beginning, the idea that their two favorite stars could be involved in something so scandalous was almost impossible to believe. They had watched Rick and Chumlee for years and thought they knew them. The show had portrayed them as hard-working, knowledgeable, and trustworthy people. It was hard for fans to reconcile this image with the possibility that they could be facing such severe consequences. It left fans feeling betrayed and confused. They began to question everything they had seen on Pawn Stars. Had the entire show been a lie? Had Rick and Chumlee been pretending to be something they weren't? The more people thought about it, the more the mystery deepened. This wasn't just a scandal, it was a complete shock to the public's perception of Rick and Chumlee. The suspense surrounding the case wasn't just about the legal proceedings, it was also about the future of Pawn Stars. The show had become a cultural phenomenon, and the idea that it might be over because of the scandal was heartbreaking for many fans. What would happen to the other members of the cast? Could the show survive without Rick and Chumlee? Would anyone be interested in watching it if the two stars were no longer part of it? These were questions that fans and the media began to ask. The possibility that the show could end added a layer of uncertainty to the situation. Would the fans ever get to see the show again with its original cast, or was this the end of an era? As the case progressed, the curiosity about what would happen next only intensified. What would Rick and Chumlee do to try and clear their names? Would they fight the charges, or would they accept their fate? Could they make a comeback, or had their careers been destroyed forever? These were the questions that fans wanted answers to. The public was on edge, waiting to see what would unfold in the coming weeks and months. The entire situation was full of tension and anticipation. No one knew what the future held for Rick and Chumlee, and that sense of uncertainty kept everyone hooked. The story was far from over. The public was still waiting for answers, and the suspense continued to build. The longer it took for the truth to come out, the more people became invested in the case. It wasn't just about the scandal anymore, it was about the story behind it. The mystery surrounding what had really happened, why it had happened, and what would happen next kept everyone on edge. Fans, the media, and the public at large were all on a journey to uncover the truth. The curiosity only grew stronger as time went on, and no one knew when or how the answers would finally come to light. But one thing was for sure: the Pawn Stars scandal was a story that would captivate people for a long time. The news of Rick Harrison and Chumlee facing life sentences stunned everyone. Fans of Pawn Stars could not believe that two of their favorite stars, who had been on their screens for so many years, could be involved in such a major scandal. It felt like a bad dream that no one could wake up from. People who had watched the show for years thought they knew these two men. Rick, the serious, knowledgeable pawn shop owner, and Chumlee, the goofy, fun-loving sidekick, had become household names. They were more than just characters on a TV show, they were part of the viewers' lives. So when the shocking news came out, it left many people in disbelief. How could this happen to them? How could these two seemingly ordinary men end up in a situation where life sentences were on the table? This was the question that haunted fans, leaving them with a deep sense of curiosity. What was going on behind the scenes? The public's curiosity grew with every passing day as more details about the scandal began to surface. It wasn't just about the life sentences, it was about how these two men, who had been so beloved by millions, had suddenly found themselves in the middle of such a mess. People wanted to understand what had led to this point. How could Rick and Chumlee, who had built their careers on being entertaining, relatable, and approachable, end up involved in something so serious? The more people learned about the charges, the more they felt that there was something bigger at play, something that they couldn't quite put their finger on. This added to the mystery of the situation, and it was impossible for anyone to ignore. The truth seemed to be hiding just out of reach, and that sense of uncertainty created a sense of suspense. Fans were desperate for answers, but the deeper they dug, the more questions emerged. The mystery surrounding Rick and Chumlee's involvement in the scandal was not just about the legal trouble they were facing, it was also about their pasts, their decisions, and what had led them to this point. Had they been hiding something all along? Was there a side to them that the public didn't know about? Fans who had followed the show for years began to question everything they thought they knew about the men they had come to admire. Were there clues that no one had noticed before? Had Rick and Chumlee been living double lives, and if so, how did they manage to keep their secrets hidden for so long? These questions swirled around the public, feeding the curiosity that was growing by the day. The more people thought about it, the more they began to wonder if they had missed something. It was as if the truth had always been right in front of them, but no one had seen it until now, and this realization only made the story more fascinating. The lack of clear information about the charges made the situation even more intriguing. While the media was quick to report the scandal, there were very few solid details. People heard bits and pieces, but nothing seemed to fully explain how things had gotten so out of control. This sense of not knowing what was going on added a layer of suspense to the entire situation. It was like a giant puzzle, with many missing pieces. The public was trying to put the pieces together, but they couldn't make sense of the bigger picture. As more time passed, the suspense grew. Fans couldn't help but wonder, how bad was it? What was really going on? Why was the situation so complicated? The more the media speculated, the more the public became invested in finding out the truth. As each new detail came to light, the mystery only deepened. It was easy to imagine that there might be a scandal surrounding reality TV stars. After all, reality TV often shows a dramatic side to people's lives. But the idea that Rick and Chumlee were facing life sentences was something entirely different. This wasn't just a small mistake or a minor slip-up, it was something serious, something life-changing. Fans couldn't wrap their heads around how this could happen to two people they had come to trust and love over the years. It felt like the world they knew from Pawn Stars had been turned upside down. The public wanted to know what had caused this. What was the root of the scandal? It was impossible to ignore the nagging feeling that something bigger was at play, and the suspense around that idea kept people glued to the news, hoping for answers. The more the story developed, the more people began to question everything. They began to wonder if they had been wrong about Rick and Chumlee all along. Were these the same men they had watched on TV for years, or had they been hiding something darker? The curiosity grew as the public's need for answers intensified. It wasn't just about the life sentences anymore. It was about understanding the decisions they had made, the actions they had taken, and the consequences that followed. Was this a case of bad luck? Or was there something more to the story that hadn't yet been revealed? Fans were searching for clues, looking for anything that might explain how these two men had ended up in such a dire situation. The mystery was too compelling to ignore. It was a story that people wanted to unravel, and they weren't going to stop until they had all the answers. The legal battle itself added another layer of suspense. Rick and Chumlee were not only fighting for their freedom, they were fighting to clear their names and rebuild their lives. What would happen next? Would they be able to defend themselves in court, or was the evidence too strong? Fans who had watched them on Pawn Stars were now wondering if they would ever be able to return to the public eye. Could they ever regain the trust of their fans? Could they rebuild their careers after such a scandal? These were questions that no one seemed to have answers to. The future of Rick and Chumlee was uncertain, and that uncertainty kept the public on edge. Fans who had supported them for so long were now unsure of what to believe. What was the truth? Could they still stand by their idols, or had everything they knew about them been a lie? The future of Pawn Stars itself was also hanging in the balance. Would the show continue without Rick and Chumlee? Could Pawn Stars survive without its two most iconic stars? Fans were torn. They loved the show, but could it ever be the same without Rick's serious demeanor and Chumlee's fun-loving personality? The thought of Pawn Stars without them was almost too much to handle for some fans. It felt like the end of an era, and the uncertainty surrounding the show's future only added to the suspense. Would the show go on? Would it be able to regain the same level of success and popularity it had before? These questions lingered in the minds of fans, making the entire situation even more captivating. As the case continued to unfold, the suspense and curiosity grew even more intense. The public was desperate for answers. Would Rick and Chumlee be able to clear their names, or had they lost everything? The story was far from over, and each new development added to the mystery. Fans, the media, and everyone who had followed the story were waiting on the edge of their seats, eager to find out what would happen next. The Pawn Stars scandal had captured the public's attention in a way few stories had, and no one knew where it would lead. The truth was still hidden, and that made the story all the more gripping. It was a mystery that no one could stop talking about, and the suspense only deepened with each passing day.